I was halfway through a bowl of Fritz's fresh clam chowder. Not the canned junk with diced potatoes like caterpillars, but the real thing, made with chopped cherry stones and a whisper of white wine when the doorbell rang. Now, normally, I would have let it ring. Wolfe, curled up in the plant room with his orchids and a level of contempt for interruption that would shame a Russian czar, would have certainly preferred I ignore it. But something about the way it rang, short, sharp, twice in quick succession, told me this wasn't a delivery boy or someone selling magazine subscriptions. I wiped my mouth, straightened my tie, you never know who you'll find on the stoop in Manhattan, and opened the door. She stepped in like she owned the place, tall, dressed in a navy skirt suit with shoulders sharp enough to cut glass, and an expression that could have gotten her out of a speeding ticket and into the police commissioner's wallet. I need to speak to Mr. Nero Wolfe, she said. Well, sure, I replied, stepping aside. But I should warn you, he doesn't do miracles, weddings, or pro bono. She didn't laugh. Most don't. I'm prepared to pay for his time, she said, reaching into her handbag and producing a slim cream-colored envelope. Her nails were red, lacquered like tail lights, and her perfume had that expensive, no-name aura, like crushed orchids and diplomatic immunity. Name? I asked, taking the envelope, but not opening it. Mrs. Margot Greer. My husband is the property manager of the Armitage building on East 72nd. He saw something, or thought he did. Now, that might have been the point where I raised an eyebrow. Not for the building. I knew it. Full of lawyers, dermatologists, and 3 ex-governors with alimony issues. But thought he did. That had potential. That was a phrase with legs. Let me see if His Majesty is in a charitable mood, I said, gesturing toward the front room. You can sit, but don't expect him to, or to like you, or to listen. She nodded once and glided to the red chair, like she'd rehearsed it. I walked back to the plant room, opened the door, and got a faceful of humidity and something that smelled like jungle guilt. Wolfe, of course, didn't turn around. Yes, Archie, there's a woman in the front room. Says her husband saw something. Or maybe didn't. Name's Margot Greer. He grunted, which for Wolfe meant he was listening. I kept going. She's got the look of money and trouble. Slim envelope. No ring. But she said husband, not ex. Either way, she seems rattled. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Just plucked a brown spotted leaf from a phalaenopsis like it had personally offended him. I do not wish to be disturbed. I smiled. That was page 1 of the Nero Wolfe book of lies. The truth. He'd be listening through the walls while I talked to her. So I went back and opened the envelope. It contained 4 crisp $100 bills and a short note written in neat mechanical pencil. This morning, my husband swore there was a dead man in the elevator mirror, but there was no body. Please, help me before he's next. Now that, dear reader, was better than chowder. I looked up at her, sitting ramrod straight, eyes darting to the mirror by the hall as if she half expected it to blink. You just bought yourself 10 minutes of Nero Wolfe's irritation, I said. Come on back. And with that, the brownstone began its usual dance, the client with a secret, me with a dozen questions, and Wolfe upstairs surrounded by orchids, already interested. Though he'd never admit it, the body in the mirror hadn't been real, not yet. But in this city, in this business, it was only a matter of time. Wolfe doesn't believe in ghosts, delusions, or metaphorical corpses. He believes in roast squaw, the Oxford English Dictionary, and charging $100 an hour minimum, which is why I expected his reaction to Mrs. Greer's story to be lukewarm at best. We entered the office in our usual choreography, me leading, her trailing, and Wolfe already in his oversized chair, the world's most immovable object. He glanced up from the New York Times book review, barely acknowledging either of us. Double quotes Mr. Wolfe. I said, this is Mrs. Margot Greer. She believes her husband saw a dead man in a mirror this morning. A hallucination, Wolfe grunted, without looking up. He thinks it was real, Margot said evenly, folding her gloved hands in her lap. And if you heard him talk about it, you'd believe it too. Wolfe looked at her now, not like a man interested in conversation, more like someone identifying an unfamiliar spice. Explain, he said. She took a breath. This morning, just before 9, my husband, Kenneth Greer, was taking the elevator down from the 12th floor of the Armitage building. He said he was alone, but when he looked into the mirror inside the elevator, he saw a man behind him, a man lying down, bleeding, very much dead. And when he turned around, Wolfe asked, annoyed, "No one there, just the elevator walls and the mirror." Bah, Wolfe's tone was dismissive enough to dent steel. A mirage, a reflected memory, possibly undigested sausage. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, with a flash of something sharp under the surface. "My husband hasn't slept since. He's barely spoken. He locked his office and refuses to go back inside the building. He says the mirror wasn't reflecting anything. It was showing him something. A message, a warning." Wolfe grunted. "Poppycock," I said. "He didn't report it to the building manager. I am the building manager," she said with a tired smile. "My husband only manages commercial leases. I run the actual operation, elevators included." I could see that caught Wolfe's attention, even if he tried to suppress it. I examined the elevator myself. Nothing. No blood, no prints, no body. I even reviewed the security footage from the lobby. But the moment the elevator doors opened, she paused. Wolfe waited. So did I. "The feed glitched," she said. "Just static, for exactly 12 seconds. That did it." Wolfe lowered his newspaper, his eyes, those to patient interrogators, finally engaged. I offered, "So either your husband's losing it, or someone wanted him to think he is." She turned to me. "I don't care which. I just want to know if he's in danger." Wolfe sighed. "Danger is a condition common to all men. It does not require my personal attention, but I do not chase ghosts, nor figments of disoriented minds." I gave her a sympathetic shrug. She stood, dignified but disappointed, and placed a business card on Wolfe's desk. "If you change your mind, Mr. Wolfe, my number is on the back." She didn't plead, didn't cry, just nodded once and let me escort her to the door. When I returned, Wolfe had gone back to reading. "You know," I said casually, "I've seen weird things in mirrors before." He didn't bite. She mentioned a 12-second video glitch. "That smells like a deliberate interruption." Still nothing. "And someone's husband believes he saw a body in a locked elevator in one of the most expensive addresses on the East Side." Wolfe flipped a page. I leaned in. "She left for $100. I shall return it." He murmured. I leaned in further. "She also left a scent of something off. Not perfume. I mean the situation, like a locked door mystery. Only the door is made of glass, and it's reflecting the future. That did it." He looked at me, frowning. "You're being fanciful, and you're being obstinate." He stared at the card she'd left. "Bah," he said again. But his hand moved, just slightly, resting near the card like it might scald him if he touched it. And I knew right then that the great Nero Wolfe had already begun to care. He just didn't know it yet. By the next morning, I figured it was over. Wolfe hadn't mentioned Margot Greer again, and I hadn't brought her up. He'd gone back to his orchids. I'd gone back to a stack of correspondence from clients who paid in actual problems, not elevator hallucinations. For all intents and purposes, it was just another Tuesday in the brownstone. And then the phone rang. It was just past 10, and Fritz was slicing radishes with terrifying precision in the kitchen. Wolfe had declared a no-interruption rule until after lunch, which of course meant fate chose that precise moment to throw a wrench in it. The voice on the line was breathless and cracked like old paint. It was Margot Greer. "Mr. Goodwin," she said. "He's dead. Kenneth is dead." I felt my jaw lock. "How?" "They found him an hour ago, in the elevator." I didn't say anything. She filled the silence. "Same one, 12th floor. The same elevator. It stopped halfway down." The maintenance man forced the doors open. He was lying on the floor. Dead. No blood, no wounds. Just dead. "Heart attack." "No." She hesitated. "That's the thing." The EMT said his body temperature was low. Too low for someone who'd only been dead 15 minutes. But he wasn't frozen, and the building's heat was working. He looked scared, like he'd seen something. I told her to stay put and hung up. I gave Wolfe the summary in under 60 seconds. He listened with that statue-still stillness. he uses when his brain is going full steam beneath a velvet dome of disinterest. Unusual, he said finally, but not, as yet, criminal. Come on, Wolfe. He dies in the same elevator where he thought he saw a body. The one with the glitchy footage. The temperature thing. If this doesn't make the needle twitch, you're due for a blood test, Wolfe grumbled, but didn't object when I put on my coat. Where are you going? He asked. To see a corpse and a widow and an elevator that maybe tells fortunes. He waved me off. Bah, you'll return convinced of ghost stories, or with a list of suspects. Either way, lunch will wait. The Armitage building on East 72nd is the kind of place where the lobby marble has a full-time shine, and the doormen know more secrets than a priest in a confessional. By the time I arrived, the scene had thinned out, but the maintenance guy, a nervous redhead named Glenn, was still there, puffing on a coffee like it might explain things to him if he stared into it long enough. You ever see anything like this before? I asked him. Elevator stopped halfway. Sure. Dead body. In it. Not so much. Any marks on the body? He shook his head. Looked like he fainted, but with his eyes open. Emp said it was like he'd gone cold to fast. Freaked him out. I asked to see the security footage. Glenn led me down to the building's control room. A little den with too many monitors and a faint smell of instant noodles. He rewound the feed. Sure enough, around 9:27 a.m., Kenneth Greer entered the elevator on the 12th floor, alone. He pushed the button for the lobby. Elevator began to descend, and then to static, again. 12 full seconds of it. When the image returned, the elevator had stopped. Greer was lying on the floor. I leaned in. Does this happen often? The glitch only in that elevator? Number 2. Coincidence, if it is, he said. It's committed to the bit. I made my way upstairs and found Margot Greer in her office, glass walls, tidy desk, and a face like someone who's already counted all the ways things could get worse. She looked up as I entered. I know it sounds crazy, lady. If you didn't sound crazy, Wolfe wouldn't be mildly interested, and I wouldn't be here. She smiled weakly, and I sat down. I want you to find out what happened, she said. Everyone's saying it was natural causes, but it wasn't. I know it. Your husband ever see a doctor? Once a year. He had high blood pressure, but nothing serious. He didn't drink, didn't smoke. He was cautious, Archie, almost. Annoyingly so. Enemies? She hesitated. No one worth killing him over. A few unhappy tenants. A man who sued us last year after his boutique flooded, but it didn't go anywhere. And as she bit her lip, there's someone else. Go on. There's a man who comes into the building once a week. I don't know his name, but every time Kenneth saw him, he got tense, avoided eye contact, wouldn't say why. Security footage. She nodded. I can get you the archives. The man always used elevator too. I scribbled a note. As I left the building, the doorman gave me a strange look. Excuse me, he said. You're with the police? Private sector, I said. Why? He looked uncomfortable. Greer. He said something last week, after his weird elevator episode. I didn't think anything of it at the time. What did he say? He looked at me, dead serious, and said, if something happens to me in that elevator, it's because I saw him. Did he say who? No, the doorman swallowed. But I think he meant the mirror. I called Wolfe on the way back. We've got a dead man, a recurring mirror ghost, a camera glitch, a mystery visitor, and an elevator that eats people. His voice came low and annoyed through the line. You sound like a child with a Ouija board. Then let's ask it some questions. There was a pause. Very well, Wolfe said. Bring Mrs. Greer in tomorrow, at 11. I shall speak to her. I hung up, smiling. The elevator had claimed its first life. Now it had Wolfe's attention. The next morning, at exactly 11, Margot Greer stepped back into the brownstone. Same suit, same composure, but her eyes had the brittle sheen of a woman who hadn't slept. Wolfe allowed her 5 full minutes to repeat the story he already knew, adding only to interruptions, one to correct her grammar, and another to scoff when she used the phrase paranormal energy. I assure you, Mrs. Greer, he said, folding his hands over his stomach, the only thing supernatural about your husband's death is the degree to which people wish to avoid Natural explanations. Then find the natural one, she said. Because I've already been told by 3 different people to let it go. Who? I asked. My building supervisor, a detective from the 19th precinct, and my late husband's brother. Were any of them in the building the day your husband died? She hesitated. Yes, all 3. I glanced at Wolfe. His eyelids didn't flutter, but I knew what that meant. A pulse under the surface. After she left, with Wolfe assuring her she'd hear from us once there was an inkling of order in this farce. I grabbed my coat and a notepad. You want the usual, Wolfe? I asked. Suspects, lies, motives, patterns, he said, waving me off. There's something irregular here, but it will not reveal itself through volume. Be precise. My first stop was the Armitage again. I spoke to the building supervisor, a sharp-nosed man named Halverson who wore his bitterness like cologne. Greer was a pain. He told me flatly, always fussing with policy, wouldn't let tenants store bikes in the basement. Thought everyone was a liability risk. But he didn't deserve to die, if that's what you're implying. I wasn't. Yet. Where were you that morning? In the sub-basement. The heating system's got a pressure valve that sticks in the cold. I check it twice a day, alone. Yeah. How long had you worked with Greer? 3 years. Ever see him get rattled before? Just once, last month. He came down from 12 pale as a sheet, wouldn't say why. I thought maybe he saw a rat the size of a Buick. Now I think, maybe he saw whatever killed him. Next, I visited the boutique owner, the one who sued them over the flooding, Rafi Lin. A nervous man with thin wrists and a thick distrust of people who wear ties. Did I want Kenneth dead? No, he said. Did I think he was a soulless, grinning bureaucrat who let my livelihood rot under 6 inches of water? Yes, but he didn't deserve that. You don't die like that from paperwork. Where were you when it happened? I just opened my shop. You can check the register tape. I did. It lined up. Still, something about the way he said that stuck with me. Not that day. Not like that. Just that, like Greer's death was a category now. A method. Then came the wild card. The brother, Philip Greer. He lived in a rent-controlled apartment in Chelsea and answered the door in silk pajamas, a robe, and the kind of cologne that belonged on a man who never touched receipts. He looked at me like I was a disappointment. Let me guess. Margot's paying you to investigate a ghost in the elevator. She's paying Wolfe, I said. I come free with the attitude. He smirked and poured himself something brown and expensive looking. My brother was a coward, he said. Always worried about lawsuits, appearances, things slipping through the cracks. I used to tell him, one day, you'll fall into one of those cracks. Guess I was right. You don't seem to broken up. Is that a requirement now? Should I throw myself into traffic to show I care? No. Just tell me where you were at 9:30 Tuesday morning. He blinked. I was with a friend, Elise Marceau. You can ask her. I will. But I suggest you also ask Margot where she was. Why? He smiled. Because Kenneth had a secret, and she knew it. By 5 o'clock, I had a half-baked pie of alibis, motives, and a few too many people who thought Kenneth Greer wasn't worth mourning. But that wasn't the real surprise. The surprise came when I got my hands on the building visitor logs from the past 3 months, courtesy of a quiet bribe to the night doorman, who didn't mind trading loyalty for a few 20s and a promise of discretion. There it was. The mystery man. Always entered between 8 o'clock and 9 a.m. Never signed a name. Never visited a listed tenant. Always used elevator too. He appeared 14 times in 3 months. The last time, the morning Kenneth died. I got back to the brownstone just before dinner. Wolfe was, naturally, seated at the table with Fritz explaining something about veal medallions. You were right, I said as I handed over the notes. It's not the mirror that's strange. It's the people staring into it. Wolfe's lips pursed. I presume you gathered nothing useful. I gave him the name of the boutique, the heating supervisor's story, the brother's accusations, and the elevator logs. He leaned back, eyes shut, fingertips together. You did well, he muttered, barely audible, which, from Wolfe, is the equivalent of being knighted by a pope. Then he opened his eyes and said, Tomorrow morning, Archie, you will interview this Elise Marceau, and after that, we invite our suspects to tea. The next morning, I tracked down Elise Marceau, Philip Greer's alibi, and from what I gathered, a retired cabaret singer who now ran a modest antique jewelry shop on the Upper East Side. Her business card was printed in gold ink and smelled faintly of lavender and gin. She greeted me with a smile that probably used to stop traffic, and eyes that now just waved it through. "Philip sent you," she asked, tilting her head. "Or are you here to accuse me of murder?" "Bit early in the day for either," I said. "Just checking where you were Tuesday morning around 9:30. Her smile didn't fade. "With Philip, having breakfast. In bed. Anyone else see you?" She held up a slice of toast. Crisp, buttered, now long gone. "Unless my marmalade can testify, no. But I'm not in the habit of killing people in elevators. I don't even use elevators. I'm claustrophobic." I thanked her, pocketed the lie, and left. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in the plant room. I didn't need to call him. When I walked into the office, he was already emerging, as if he'd been orbiting the problem like a bee around its queen. He lowered himself into the chair with the ceremony of a man sitting down to solve. "Civilization report," he said. "She's lying. No corroboration, and she knew what I was going to ask before I opened my mouth." He nodded once. "Good. Now we proceed. To what? To assembling the enemy." That's Wolfe speak for inviting suspects to the brownstone usually. With a baited hook and a poker face carved in granite. "Tea?" I asked. "To genteel. Lunch?" "They will arrive staggered, 30-minute intervals. Begin with Halverson." Fritz prepared the dining room like it was Versailles, and I made the calls. Surprisingly, no one refused. Maybe the mystery had rattled more than nerves. Maybe they just wanted to be near something that smelled like resolution. At 12:30 sharp, Halverson arrived. He looked around the office like he expected it to be bugged or booby-trapped. Wolfe didn't rise, of course. He never does. But he gave the man a slow once-over and gestured to the red armchair. With a nod that suggested royalty and disdain had gotten drunk and produced a bastard child. "Mr. Halverson," Wolfe said, "your account of the morning in question lacks one ingredient I find indispensable: verification." Halverson swallowed. "I told your guy the truth. I was in the sub-basement, alone, with no witness, and a convenient absence of surveillance." "What were you implying? That your dislike of Mr. Greer was not simply professional? That you found his management style intolerable? His policies intrusive? And his death, perhaps, a relief? That's garbage, but not impossible." Halverson's eyes narrowed. "You trying to pin this on me?" "I am trying," Wolfe said calmly, "to determine why a man whose death resembled no known natural cause is being explained away by everyone with unseemly haste." I saw Halverson flinch. He covered it by standing up. "I've got nothing to hide." "No," Wolfe murmured. "Just nothing to offer." Next came Rafi Lin, the boutique owner. He brought tension with him like it was stitched into his coat. Wolfe wasted no time. "You threatened to sue the Greers," he said. "I did sue them, and lost. Yet you remain in the building." Lin gave a tight nod. "I have a lease, and pride. You also have a grudge. I'm not a killer, no, but resentment is a cousin to impulse. I was in my shop that morning. I have receipts." Wolfe waved a hand. "Yes," Mr. Goodwin verified. "You are inconveniently alibied." Lin blinked. "So why am I here?" Wolfe leaned forward slightly, which, for him, is like lunging. "Because you are an angry man who lost something, and I needed to see whether that loss extended to your self-control." Next up was Philip Greer. He swept in like he belonged there, which irritated Wolfe immediately. He sat without being asked. "I'm just here to cooperate," he said with a grin. "You know, do my civic duty." "You're doing something," Wolfe said flatly. "Whether it's civic remains to be seen." Philip laughed. "You think I killed my brother? You stand to gain his position, his accounts, possibly his wife." That last bit wiped the grin. "She wouldn't touch me with a borrowed 10-foot pole," he muttered. "And Kenneth didn't have money. He had access, which is not the same, but perhaps useful, especially if you knew someone was trying to scare him." "I didn't," he said, "and I don't care who did." Wolfe closed his eyes for a beat. "That," he said softly, is the first honest thing you've said. The final appointment was Margot Greer herself. She arrived just past 3, a little more frayed around the edges, but carrying herself like a woman who's refused to fall apart and resents anyone expecting her to. You brought them all in, she said, seeing herself without prompting. I did, Wolfe replied, and all of them showed reluctance to believe your husband was murdered, which means, of course, that he was. Her lips pressed together. You believe me? I believe that he saw something, and that someone else knew it. Then what now? Wolfe drummed his fingers once. Now we wait. Something will shift. A second movement. A note out of tune. Another body. Possibly. She nodded once. Then I hope it's the right one. After she left, Wolfe leaned back, eyes closed, hands steepled. Someone is playing with reflections, Archie. Not illusions, distortions. What the mirror showed was not a lie. It was a preview, a threat, a promise. And just then, as if on cue, the phone rang. I picked it up, expecting a follow-up, a complaint, or a hang-up. Instead, I got the doorman from the Armitage. We have a problem, he said, voice shaking. Someone else just saw a body in the elevator mirror. I paused. Who? He whispered it. Me. That night, I didn't bother putting my coat away when I came in. I tossed it over the arm of the office chair and told Wolfe flat out, we've got a second sighting. Same elevator, same glitch. He didn't answer. He was seated behind his desk, eyes closed, lips barely moving, a man composing symphonies of logic behind shut lids. It was the doorman, I said. His name's Lou Torres, ex-Navy. Doesn't scare easy. He told me he went to ride up to 12 just after the cleaning crew left. Elevator door opened. He stepped in and bam. He froze. Wolfe opened his eyes, slow and heavy. What did he see? A man lying on the floor, same position as Kenneth Greer. Only this time, the face was wrong. Wrong, Lou swears it wasn't Greer. It was someone else, someone he recognized. Wolfe raised a brow. Who? He wouldn't say. Just that he'd seen the man in the building earlier that week. And get this, right after he saw the body in the mirror. He looked down, and the elevator was empty. But the footage glitched again. 12 seconds of static, exactly like before. That got Wolfe to lean forward, his version of jumping to his feet in shock. This is not merely eccentric, he said. It is deliberate. You think someone's staging the hallucinations? No, I think someone is exploiting them. We sat in silence for a moment. Then I said, we've got suspects, but they're not feeling ripe yet. Name them, Wolfe instructed. First, Halverson, the building supervisor. He had a motive, resentment, control issues, but no direct gain. He could have manipulated the elevator systems, Wolfe said, or interfered with the footage, perhaps even administered a poison or drug that left no trace. I nodded. Next, Rafi Lynn, angry ex-tenant, hated Greer for botching the flood. Damage response, but he's got an airtight alibi. Airtight alibis, Wolfe said, are often sown from sheer desperation. Third, Philip Greer, brother, hates the dead guy, stands to gain something financial, or at least notoriety. Lies like it's a sport, but his alibi, Elise Marceau, holds sort of. She made life for reasons of her own. Exactly. Which brings us to her. Elise, no motive. Unless she's covering for Philip or had a secret grudge. Wolfe waved a hand. Everyone has a motive, Archie. The difference lies in which are permitted to bloom. I added, and Margot, she claims innocence. But she had the most access, knew about the footage, knew about the elevator quirks, and she's already been warned to keep quiet by 3 different men. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. And yet she came to us. A contradiction. I raised my pen. So who's our prime? That, Wolfe said, depends on whom the mirror shows. The next day, we called Lou Torres in. He arrived in full uniform, head in hand, spine straight, expression tight. You saw a body in the mirror, I said. He nodded. It was a guy who came in 2 days ago. Said he was meeting someone in one to see, no name, no appointment. Just got. Waved in. Did you tell anyone? Didn't get the chance. After I saw that reflection, I nearly bolted. Next thing I know, the door's open and it's empty. But I swear, Mr. Goodwin, I saw it. And I know that guy. You didn't report it, would you? He shot back. They already think Kenneth Greer was imagining things. And then he turned up dead. Give us a description, Wolfe said from across the room. Torres hesitated, then said, tall, late 30s, wore a gray coat, thin face, clean-shaven, kind of polite scary. You know the type. I did. New York had plenty of polite scary. That night, I went back to the Armitage. It was a long shot, but I figured if someone was using that elevator for intimidation, or worse, they'd need access, possibly even residency. I flipped through the tenant list and cross-referenced recent visitor logs. One name popped up more than once in early mornings: David Corwin, an independent contractor listed under 1 to C. Hadn't answered the door earlier in the week when I knocked. This time, I got lucky. The man who answered matched Lou's description to the coat. Corwin blinked at me, clearly not thrilled. What is this about? Routine, I lied. Just double-checking all visitor entries after an equipment malfunction. I don't use the elevator, he said. Funny, I replied, because you're on camera in it, twice, including the day Greer died. His lips tightened. I'd like to know what you were doing that morning. I was meeting a client, he said, for soundproofing consultation. Name, he paused. No comment. I didn't need Wolfe's help to know I'd found a lie. The kind that tastes metallic the second it leaves a mouth. Back at the brownstone, I laid it out. David Corwin, I said. Thin, gray coat, lives. In 1 to C claims he had a meeting that morning, but won't say with who. Then he is involved. Wolfe said simply, and the mirror was not a prophecy. It was a leak. A leak. Someone is using the mirror not to show a death, but to suggest it. Intimidation. Fear. The mirror is a message, a warning to keep silent. The fact that Mr. Greer died afterward is either the result of shock or something more fatal, precisely, but not supernatural. We are dealing with manipulation, psychological, visual, perhaps even chemical. I leaned back. So who's pulling the strings? Wolfe closed his eyes. We must find out who David Corwin met that morning, and what secrets Kenneth Greer stumbled upon. Until then, our list remains long, but the circle is tightening. The next morning, I hit the pavement early, chasing down the invisible thread Wolfe had spun the night before. Find who David Corwin met, and if I couldn't find the man, I'd find his secrets. The Armitage's tenant registry listed 1 to C as a private residence, sublet to Corwin just 6 months ago. That didn't give me much, but a short walk down the hall to 1 to B did. That's where I found Lorraine Braxby, a dental hygienist with sharp eyes and a loose relationship with. For money, maybe for a favor, maybe just because you like chaos. But either way, Kenneth Greer saw something he shouldn't have and ended up dead. Still no denial, just silence. Then Halverson muttered, Greer was weak. He never should have taken the job if he couldn't handle pressure. Back in the brownstone, I laid out the whole mess. Wolfe listened, still, as always, to alibis cracked. Elise and Halverson, I concluded, and Corwin starting to look like the spider. At the center, Wolfe closed his eyes. Then the time has come. For what? To bait the trap. He opened a drawer and pulled out an envelope, the one Margot Greer had left on her first visit, still containing her business card. We will call them all in, Wolfe said. Tomorrow, 4 o'clock. The full cast. He nodded. It's time, he said, for the elevator to speak. In a Nero Wolfe case, trouble usually knocks twice. Once for the client, once for me. And that second knock came early the next morning, metaphorical, but loud as a gong. It started with me paying a little follow-up visit to David Corwin. Wolfe wanted to know if the man would rattle when reminded of Elise Marceau's broken alibi. I was happy to do the rattling. But when I got to 1 to C, the door was ajar, not open ajar. That 2-inch invitation that says either I'm expecting you, or get ready to be surprised in the worst possible way. I pushed gently. Corwin, no answer. The lights were off. I stepped in quiet, hand in my coat, near the grip of a little insurance policy I keep for such occasions. The apartment was cold. Not figuratively, cold. Like someone had opened a freezer and walked away. The curtains were drawn. A teacup sat abandoned on the counter, steamless and crusted. And then I saw the writing. On the wall near the window, in something that looked distressingly close to blood, though it later turned out to be paint, or thick marker, were for words, "I see you too." He didn't have time to do much about it. That's when the hit came. Not the kind that knocks you out. The kind that stuns and shoves and sends your teeth into your cheek. I was hit from behind hard. Low, professional. My chin clipped the corner of the kitchen table. I spun. But whoever did it was already gone. Just the door swinging slightly and a breeze that smelled like cold sweat and carpet glue. I staggered back to the brownstone, jaw bruised, ego wounded worse. Wolfe took one look at me and said, "You look like you've been in a pie fight and lost. Only the crust," I muttered and slumped into the red armchair. "Explain," he said, already lifting the phone to call Fritz for ice. Corwin's apartment was open. Place was cold. Messy. Someone left a message, painted or faked blood. "I see you two." I got jumped, not hard, just enough to send a memo. He handed me a handkerchief. And the memo. "They're watching us, or at least me. They know we're closing in." He nodded once, then said, "Good. That means they're about to make a mistake." That afternoon, the calls went out again. Wolfe's invitation, that's a fancy way of saying summons, went to all the regular suspects. Margot Greer, the widow with more composure than trust, Philip Greer, the brother with slick charm and no alibi. Elise Marceau, the alibi that cracked like glass. Halverson, the supervisor whose silence was a confession. David Corwin, who didn't answer his phone. And Rafi Lynn, who had no real reason to be there, which meant Wolfe had won. They were to arrive at 4 p.m. sharp, Wolfe's office, no exceptions. Fritz had coffee and cookies ready, which seemed wildly inadequate for the amount of lies about to be baked in that room. But Corwin didn't show at 4:06. Wolfe tapped his fingers once and said, "Mr. Goodwin, retrieve him." I stood, but the phone rang before I reached the door. I picked it up. Goodwin. The voice on the other end was thin, anxious, and female. "Mr. Goodwin, it's Lorraine Braxby, from 1 to B." I straightened. "Yes? There's a problem." David Corwin just left the building carrying a large duffel bag. I saw something that looked heavy and human. I told Wolfe, and he didn't react, not with words. Just a slow inhale, eyes closed. "A second body," he said, "and an attempt to disappear." "What do we do?" He opened his eyes. "We spring the trap anyway, whether Corwin is here or not. The net is already falling." At 4:17, I got another call from a cabbie who owed me a favor. He'd just dropped off a man matching Corwin's description at the East River, near an abandoned dockyard. "I'll go," I told Wolfe. He shook his head. "You've been assaulted once today. I require you here." "So what? We let him dump the body?" "If there's a body, he will not dispose of it in a public space without being seen. He is panicking. That makes him visible. But more importantly," he turned to the group assembled in the room, "his absence speaks louder than his lies." I stood near the door, arms crossed, while Wolfe gave his usual performance, slow, precise, soaked in contempt. "You are all here because you are part of a machine," he said. "One that began as intimidation and ended in death. Some of you turned the gears. Some ignored the sound. And some simply refused to believe the machine existed." He let that sit for a second. Mr. Greer was not murdered in the traditional sense. He was broken. By design, a man's fear, when amplified correctly, becomes terminal. And someone in this room orchestrated that. They looked at each other, not in surprise, but in calculation. Margaret's eyes were locked on her lap. Philip looked suddenly pale. Elise stiffened. Halverson just stared forward, breathing through his nose. Wolfe continued. The mirror in the elevator was no coincidence. It was tampered with. Corwin manipulated lighting, angles, even rigged audio projections. He worked with someone inside the building, someone who gave him access. Halverson's shoulders tensed. "And now," Wolfe said softly, "he is fleeing." At that exact moment, the front door buzzed. I moved fast. When I opened it, it was the last person I expected. David Corwin, disheveled, out of breath, and alone. "I didn't do it," he said, which, as we all know, is exactly what guilty people always say. David Corwin stood in the foyer like he'd just stepped out of a confession booth. And not quite finished confessing. His gray coat was rumpled, collar askew, and there was a fine tremor in his right hand, just barely visible unless you were trained to see people trying not to panic. Wolfe didn't rise from his chair. Of course he didn't. He simply said, "Mr. Corwin, thank you for gracing us. You are late, and perhaps lucky." Corwin looked around the room. He hadn't expected everyone to be there, least of all Elise, whose eyes narrowed like she'd seen a ghost. Halverson leaned back, arms folded, trying for nonchalance and failing. Philip Greer offered a thin smirk. Margot Greer simply stared at Corwin with a kind of exhausted loathing that said she'd run. Out of energy for fear, you were expected. At 4 o'clock, Wolfe continued. You arrive at 4:31. In that time, did you dispose of something? Corwin said nothing. I closed the door behind him and guided him to the vacant seat Wolfe had been saving. The red chair, the one directly in Wolfe's line of fire. I didn't kill Kenneth Greer, Corwin said. Whatever you've heard, it's not true. No, Wolfe replied. Then you will not object to hearing the truth. The room went still. I stood by the bookcase, ready for any twitch that suggested someone was going to bolt or boil. Fritz peeked in once with a tray of tea and quietly retreated when he saw the storm brewing. Wolfe folded his hands over his stomach and addressed the group. We have a dead man, he said. One who saw an image in an elevator mirror. A man lying on the floor, bleeding. An image that did not exist, or so it seemed. He turned slightly to Corwin. But it did exist, didn't it, Mr. Corwin, because you put it there. Corwin's jaw flexed. I didn't kill him. No, you terrified him, Wolfe snapped. And you did so methodically. You manipulated the elevator's lighting, perhaps using a timed projector hidden in the vent. You altered the camera feed, with Halverson's help, creating time static to match the illusion. The mirror was merely the delivery mechanism, a reflection of death, a preview of fate. Halverson shifted in his seat, but Wolfe didn't turn his head. Kenneth Greer had no history of hallucination, no psychosis, but he was meticulous, prone to anxiety, and most importantly, he was a threat to someone's project, deal, or secret. Wolfe leaned forward, just slightly, but enough to make the room feel hotter. What did he find, Mr. Corwin? Corwin licked his lips. He wasn't supposed to. I mean, he got into a file. He saw an invoice that didn't make sense. Whose file? Corwin hesitated. Wolfe looked to Philip. Your brother was about to report a misuse of funds, wasn't he? Perhaps to Margot. Perhaps to a board. Philip gave a shrug that was more twitch than denial. If he found something, he didn't tell me. Wolfe ignored him and pressed Corwin. You were hired to frighten him. Who hired you? Corwin stared at the carpet. Wolfe's voice dropped to a growl. You rigged a death. If it was unintentional, then speak now, before the law decides it was otherwise. Corwin opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. It was Halverson. He said at last. He told me Greer was digging, said we needed to scare him off. Just enough to shake him. I designed the mirror trick, but I didn't mean for. I thought it would just rattle him. Everyone looked at Halverson. He stood, slowly. He's lying. Wolfe gave a soft laugh. No, Mr. Halverson, you are. Halverson took a step toward the door. I blocked it. You were paid by someone to allow Corwin access, not just to the elevator tech, but to the security feeds. You created the glitch pattern. You helped design the illusion. I never. Wolfe raised a hand, silencing him. But Kenneth Greer was not just frightened. He died. His system collapsed. Whether from stress or something else, the cause is irrelevant to intent. The intent was to break him. Halverson looked at Corwin. You told me it would just be a prank. I told you it would look like a prank. Corwin snapped. You knew what we were doing. But who put you up to it? I asked. The room was dead quiet. Then Elise said it. Philip did. Philip spun toward her. You little. He did, she repeated, eyes locked on Wolfe. He told me Kenneth was about to pull the plug on a backdoor deal. Some lease for a fake shell company. Philip stood to lose 50 grand. Philip laughed. You believe. Her Wolfe said. I believe patterns. And I believe guilt reveals itself through desperation. Philip stood, but his face had lost its color. "You can't prove anything." "No," Wolfe said, "but the district attorney's office will be happy to test the theory." They took Philip and Halverson away that evening. Corwin was charged later with conspiracy, unlawful surveillance, and reckless endangerment. They couldn't pin the actual death on him, but the weight of what they could prove would be heavy enough. Elise disappeared from the city for a while. Margot, after a long silence, sent Wolfe a handwritten thank you note and an absurdly expensive box of cigars. Wolfe didn't smoke, of course, but he kept them anyway. A trophy, and the mirror in the elevator? Replaced, the entire unit scrapped. But if you ask Lou Torres, the doorman, he'll tell you this. Sometimes, late at night, when no one's inside, elevator to still stops on the 12th floor all by itself, and no one steps in. You'd think once the police haul away two men in cuffs, and Wolfe gives his usual modest shrug of victory, the story would be done. But this case, like a reflection in a crooked mirror, had another side. 2 days after Halverson and Philip Greer were booked, I was sitting at my desk catching up on paperwork. I had no intention of finishing when the phone rang. It was Lou Torres again, the Armitage doorman, and this time his voice had lost every trace of its usual calm. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, low and breathless, "there's something you need to see. Another body in the mirror. No, worse." He hung up before I could press. I told Wolfe, who merely waved a hand and said, "Go, but be back for dinner. Fritz is preparing lamb." I got to the Armitage just past 3. Torres was waiting in the lobby, jittering in place like someone standing too close to a fire he couldn't see. "It's not the mirror," he whispered, ushering me toward the elevator. "It's what was behind it, behind it." He hit the stop button between floors and opened a small maintenance panel. Just above the mirror's frame, inside wasn't wires or bolts, it was a camera. A camera wired into the wall and from the looks of it, routed through a junction box that hadn't been city code in 15 years. "Found it during routine inspection," he said. "Only Halverson or someone with keys to the service panels could have placed it. And it's got AUDIO pickup." I leaned in. "So this was more than a scare job." He nodded. "It was surveillance. Someone was using the elevator to record conversations. Greer must have found out. He looked at me, or he said something in there. Something someone couldn't afford to let him repeat. Back at the brownstone, I laid it all out." Wolfe listened in silence, only breaking it once to mutter, "Monstrous." "You think Philip knew?" I asked. Wolfe's eyes were closed. "He may have. But if not, someone else did." "But who?" "We already rounded up the suspects." "No, Archie," he said, finally sitting up. "We rounded up the obvious ones." The next twist came in the form of a file folder that had arrived by messenger the next morning. No return address, just my name in block letters and a typewritten label. "Lisa's 12th floor, internal use only." Inside were photocopies, dozens of them, of floor plans, security wiring, and private leases signed under pseudonyms. One in particular stood out. Suite 1 to D, leased to a company called Asterion Group LLC. Asterion didn't exist, at least not in the business registry, but the lease had been signed by Margot Greer. I didn't tell Wolfe right away. I took a cab to the Armitage and confronted her in her office. "I thought you said you only managed the building," I said, tossing the folder on her desk. "I do." "Then why lease a non-existent office to a fake company?" She didn't answer. "Margot," I said, "was the elevator mirror your idea?" She shook her head, slowly. "No. But I knew about it. From the beginning." "No. Only after Kenneth died." I started digging. I found the surveillance logs in his desk. The mirror had been wired months earlier. Kenneth didn't install it, but he discovered it. Then, why lie to us? She looked at me, tired, furious, grieving, and hiding something. "Because I couldn't afford to be dragged into this." "Do you know who Asterion Group really was?" I waited. "Kenneth," she said. "It was his shell company." "What for?" She opened a drawer and pulled out another file, one marked confidential, lease modifications. "He was selling private access," she said, "to high-paying clients under the table subleases. Access to the elevator feed, even elevator priority. Do you know what that's worth to the right person in this city?" Enough to get killed over. She nodded. I brought it all back to Wolfe. He read through the files in silence. Then he said, Kenneth Greer was not a victim of fear. Alone. He was also a man walking through a house of mirrors he helped build. The elevator surveillance was his creation. Corwin and Halverson simply repurposed it. Philip saw a chance to manipulate it. But it was Margot who cleaned up the mess. You think she knew the mirror had become a murder weapon? No. Wolfe said. But she benefited from its silence. He leaned back, which means she, too, must be invited. Another showdown? No. Just dinner. Informal. Tell her it's not about guilt, isn't it? Guilt, Wolfe said softly, is rarely worn by only one. That night, Margot came to dinner. She didn't speak much. Wolfe said nothing accusatory, only offered her wine and silence. It wasn't a cross-examination. It was awake. And when she left, she paused at the door and said, "Thank you." For what? Wolfe asked. For seeing that no one gets away with everything. The Armitage replaced both elevators, new mirrors, new wiring, no ghosts. But every now and then, according to Lou Torres, elevator still skips a beat between the 12th and the 10th. He says it's just a sensor. But sometimes, when the mirror's angle is just right, you can see something over your shoulder. And it's not you. After a week like that, full of lies, illusions, surveillance wires, and elevator ghosts, there's only one place in New York City where a man can go to feel like the world still makes sense. Nero Wolfe's plant room. I found Wolfe there the next morning, seated in a rattan chair beneath the misted glass dome, surrounded by his orchids minus 10,000 of them, all smugly flourishing under his ironclad schedule of light, humidity, and whispered Latin. He didn't look up when I stepped in. He rarely does. Theodore Horstman was there too, flitting around with his atomizer, tending to a cluster of Paphiopedilum sandrianum like they were opera singers with fragile egos. It was warm, damp, smelled like green life and wet bark, the only jungle Wolfe would ever tolerate, the only one he ever ruled. You don't knock, Wolfe said without turning his head. There's no door, I replied. Also, you asked me to keep you posted. I asked you to refrain from speaking for at least 48 hours unless someone had died. I sat on the edge of a planter bench and loosened my tie. Close. Someone resigned. Margot Greer. She turned in her notice yesterday. Said she was going to leave the city. Start over. She won't. Wolfe said, calmly. She'll linger. Watch, wait. People who know too much tend to stay near the scene, like a cat around an empty fishbowl. She also sent back the cigars. Wolfe raised one eyebrow. Good. I dislike sentimentality. Theodore cleared his throat and stepped away, giving us space. We sat there in silence for a minute, listening to the hiss of mist and the faint hum of the orchid room's internal fan. Finally, I said, you know what still bothers me? No, Wolfe replied. That phrase, the one Corwin painted on the wall. I see you two. Wolfe finally looked at me. Yes, it wasn't about fear or a warning. It was a mirror message, a response. To what? To Greer's discovery, to someone else watching. He saw something, and someone saw him seeing it. Wolfe nodded. As I said, monstrous. He stood slowly, with the reluctance of a man departing a womb. I shall dine early today, he muttered. Tell Fritz. Fritz, as usual, had prepared a masterpiece disguised as lunch. Veal medallions in tarragon butter, roasted squash with garlic slivers, and a small crisp salad with thin ribbons of fennel. I don't mention the food this often because I'm a glutton. I mention it because Fritz is an artist, and his medium is redemption, while Wolfe ate, methodically, silently, with the grace of a man who knew that tasting was thinking. I flipped through the last few notes in the file. Any regrets? I asked finally. About what? The mirror, the surveillance, the death, the survivors. No, Wolfe said. Regret is a clumsy substitute for clarity. Greer was running a scam. Philip exploited it. Halverson helped. Corwin engineered. The terror. Elise lied. Margot maybe looked away. And what did you do, Archie? I shrugged. I stared into the mirror and didn't blink. Wolfe sipped his beer and nodded. Then you saw something no one else did. What's that? He stood up, wiped his mouth with precision, and said, that the truth always reflects, even when people try to bend the glass. Later that afternoon, I caught Fritz polishing the brass on the entry door. I asked him why. Halverson, still in police custody, wasn't invited. Wolfe said, "He's not needed. He was merely a tool. I want the hand that wielded it." By 3:55 p.m., the brownstone's front room felt like a pressure cooker dressed in fine coats. Fritz had brewed tea that nobody touched. The guests sat like chess pieces, Margot at the far end of the couch, arms crossed but chin high, Elise near the bookshelf, pretending disinterest, Corwin pale and pacing near the window, and Philip Greer sprawled with performative ease in the red chair. Wolfe sat behind his desk, not so much addressing the room as occupying it entirely. He closed the book he wasn't reading and began, "The purpose of this gathering is not to assign blame. That's already done. Nor is it to soothe guilt. That will come later, if at all. This is about clarity, something sorely lacking in mirrors and among those who misuse them." Corwin shifted. Philip rolled his eyes. Elise looked at her shoes. Wolfe continued, "Let us begin with Kenneth Greer, a man burdened with a secret. He had, without question, engineered a shadow leasing operation, a scam. That scam created risk. Risk invited scrutiny. And scrutiny, as it always does, invited panic. He turned to Margot. "Your husband didn't die because he was evil. He died because someone believed he might expose evil." Margot flinched. "Elise," Wolfe said, "you lied for Philip, perhaps out of affection, perhaps out of guilt. But your lie concealed something more useful. Proximity. You were there. You knew who Kenneth was meeting. You knew Corwin wasn't improvising his tricks. He was executing someone else's plan." "Philip," Elise began. "No," Wolfe cut her off. "We'll come to him." He looked at Corwin. "Your mistake was arrogance. You thought you were manipulating perception, but someone was manipulating you. Halverson gave you access. You believed it was Philip pulling the strings. But Philip," he paused, turning slowly toward the man in the red chair, "was never smart enough." Philip scoffed. "Excuse me, I will," Wolfe replied dryly. "Once I finish." He steepled his fingers. The real architect of this scheme knew Kenneth's weaknesses, knew how fear could be weaponized, knew that a heart attack, or even just fatal panic, would leave no trace. And when the mirror was no longer enough, they escalated. They planted the phrase "I see you" to, not to frighten, but to provoke. He turned slowly to Margot. "You, Mrs. Greer." The room stopped breathing. Wolfe went on. "You discovered the scam, not after Kenneth died, but before. You had access to the leases. You saw the money vanish, but it wasn't the fraud that hurt you. It was the betrayal. He never told you, never trusted you. So you did what you've always done. You managed the building." She stood, face unreadable. "I didn't kill him," she said quietly. "No," Wolfe said, "but you arranged his destruction. You funded Corwin. You ordered Halverson to grant access. You pretended to be the widow, wronged, grieving, confused. But all the while, you were the one holding the blueprints." "No proof," Philip muttered. "You can't prove any of that." Wolfe reached into his desk drawer and produced the envelope, the same one Margot had left on her first visit. He opened it and drew out a second business card, one hidden behind the first, this one embossed not with her name, but with the words, "Asterian Group, Executive Leasing Management." Wolfe handed it to me. I passed it to her. "You dropped that," Wolfe said, "and tried to retrieve it on your way out. You missed." Margot didn't speak. Corwin sank into his chair. Elise closed her eyes. Philip swore under his breath, and Wolfe, with the calm of a man pruning a dead leaf, said, "The trap is sprung. Mr. Goodwin, you may call the authorities." The moment the words left Wolfe's mouth, "Mr. Goodwin, you may call the authorities," Margot Greer didn't flinch. She didn't cry, didn't run, didn't protest. Instead, she sat back down in the same elegant, composed posture she'd carried from the first day she entered our brownstone. "I suppose I should congratulate you," she said. "No," Wolfe replied, his voice heavy and dispassionate. "You should thank your husband. He did half the work. By dying, by leaving a trail," Wolfe said. "Fraud leaves fingerprints, but so does guilt." I was already on the phone with Inspector Kramer. He picked up on the second ring, and by the fourth, I'd explained we had enough to drop a few jaws. He grunted something about finally and said he'd be over in 20 minutes. When I hung up, the room was a bomb ticking on pure tension. Philip Greer leaned forward. So wait, she set it all up, the elevator, the whole fear campaign, no. Wolfe said, she approved it. She facilitated it. Halverson and Corwin built the illusion, but she signed off on the show. Elise turned to Margot. You knew what it would do to him. Margot's eyes flicked toward her, calm as glass. I thought it would frighten him into coming clean. That's all. Just rattle him. Make him talk. He wouldn't talk to me, so I hired someone else to get the truth out. And when he died, I asked. She met my gaze. I panicked. I didn't expect it. He was always so careful. I thought he'd talk. He was supposed to talk. Wolfe interjected. Instead, he died of fear or guilt or both. And rather than admit your part, you paid to erase the blueprint. But you couldn't erase the signature. The signature? Philip asked. Wolfe gestured toward the business card I'd handed her earlier. Asterian Group. The name appears in lease transfers connected to 3 of the off-book units in the Armitage. Your signature, Mrs. Greer, is on all 3. In abbreviated form, M. Greer, but consistent and precise. Margot looked away. I had to protect the building, she said softly. It's the only thing I ever really owned. Kenneth was tearing it apart from the inside. You helped him. I reminded her, until I didn't. David Corwin hadn't said a word since the accusation landed. But finally, he stirred. She said it would be a psychological operation, he said, looking straight at me, maybe because he couldn't meet Wolfe's eyes. She said all I had to do was design the illusion, that Kenneth would crack and confess, or at least give up whatever files he had. I never touched him, never went near him. And Halverson, he made the hardware easy to access, gave me panel keys, rewired the feed. For cash. How much? $5,000. Cash, Wolfe snorted faintly. A murder for less than the price of a cheap Persian rug. How very modern. I checked my watch. Kramer should be here in 10. Let him take them. Wolfe said, all of them. Philip for attempted obstruction, Corwin for illegal surveillance, and Mrs. Greer, he turned back to her, for orchestrating a death, even if it came by fear rather than force. I didn't kill him, she whispered. Wolfe nodded once, firmly. But you brought him to the edge of a precipice, then removed the railing. That, madam, is not much different. 5 minutes later, Kramer came stomping in with 2 uniforms in tow, and that permanent cigar clamped in his jaw like it owed him money. What have you got for me, Wolfe? Wolfe barely moved. A conspiracy to defraud, intimidate, and ultimately unmake a man. No blood, no bullet, no blade. Just fear engineered with precision and approved by someone who knew the victim intimately. Kramer glanced at me, and we can prove it. I handed over the lease packet, the Asterian files, and Margot's dual-signed business card. He skimmed the papers, eyes tightening with each page. Then he looked up. All right, everyone stay seated. The uniforms stepped forward. Corwin stood. Resigned, Elise stayed frozen in her chair, guilt written in the set of her jaw. Philip opened his mouth, then closed it, deciding against a scene. But Margot stood slowly, hands folded in front of her, and said, I only ever wanted the truth. Wolfe didn't look up from his desk. You got it. Too late. The door closed. Behind them, the brownstone was silent again. Outside, traffic resumed. Somewhere down the block, a car honked, and inside, I let out a long breath. Another one for the books, I said. Wolfe raised an eyebrow. A case about reflections, and the lies we hope others see in them. Any regrets? He shook his head. Only that mirrors never forget. You'd think that once Inspector Kramer has his cuffs on people, and the door shuts behind the guilty, all that's left is paperwork and maybe a good scotch. But the truth is, justice doesn't click into place like a light switch. Sometimes it leaks, like guilt, like grief, and sometimes it breaks. Loudly. It broke that night. At 9:40 p.m. Wolfe and I were in the office. He was rereading something about orchid nutrition. I was finishing up my notes for the inevitable deposition Kramer would hound us for later. The brownstone was quiet, warm, and almost smug with order again. Then the phone rang. It was Kramer. She confessed, he said, his voice like gravel soaked in disbelief. Which one? Margot Greer. I sat up. She confessed to the surveillance setup. No, Kramer said. To everything. Apparently, after the arrest, Kramer had taken Margot to his office at the precinct. She hadn't spoken for over an hour, just stared at the wall with that same porcelain calm she wore like a second skin. Then, out of nowhere, she'd asked for a legal pad and began writing. 3 pages, longhand. No lawyer present. Then she folded it neatly and handed it to Kramer. I need you to read this, she told him. And when he did, he called us. By 10:30, I was at the precinct with Wolfe's written approval in my breast pocket and a taxi driver who asked twice if I was sure I wanted to go somewhere that close to the river at this hour. I met Kramer in his office. He slid the note across his desk. The top reads simply, Confession of Margot and Greer. Statement of truth. I'll summarize the rest. Kenneth Greer had started the scam. Yes, he'd set up a Styrian group to funnel off the book leasing. Kramer finished telling me, then tossed the note onto his desk like it burned. She says it wasn't murder, he muttered, just leverage. She thought if he believed someone was watching him, he'd confess. Instead, he died. She's not wrong, I said. She's not right, either, Kramer replied. Then he lit one of those awful cigars and added, Wolfe said once, the method matters less than the intent. Well, her intent ended a man. That's enough for me. When I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was, of course, waiting in the office with a brandy he hadn't sipped. Well, he asked. She wrote it all down, I said. Admitted the scam, admitted the setup, said it was meant to scare him into stopping. Wolfe nodded once. As expected. She said she didn't mean for him to die. She removed the brakes on a car at the top of a hill. Wolfe said, whatever she intended, the result is gravity. I poured myself a glass, sat down. Let it burn a little on the way down. You think she'll serve time? Possibly. You think she regrets it? Wolfe closed his eyes. No, he said. I think she regrets getting caught. That night, I found myself staring at the office mirror again. Not the elevator kind. Not rigged. Just your ordinary, polished reflection. The kind that shows you what you are, not what you fear. And maybe that's worse. Because when you see yourself clearly, with no glitch, no distortion, you can't pretend you're not complicit. Not in the case. Not in the world. Not in anything. A week later, it rained. Not the dramatic kind that cues violins or revelations, but a steady, shoulder-soaking drizzle that turned Manhattan's usual noise into a long, gray hush. A rain that made you reflective. Pun absolutely intended. The papers had their fun. Widow behind elevator death mirror scheme. Deadly reflections in Upper East. One tabloid went with the lady in Suite 1 to D. I saved that one. For the files had a certain noir flair. Corwin pleaded down to conspiracy and unlawful surveillance. He'll spend some time somewhere cold and beige, and maybe he'll rethink weaponizing anxiety. Philip Greer managed to wriggle out with probation and a fine. Typical. He always did look like the kind of guy who keeps his conscience in his cufflinks. Elise Marceau vanished from the city entirely. Wolfe didn't ask where. I didn't tell him I saw her once, boarding a train at Grand Central with a single suitcase. And no goodbye. And Margot Greer was arraigned quietly, without pressin'. The courtroom, she didn't contest the charges, made no speech, just nodded once when the judge asked if she understood. I'm not sure if she did. As for Wolfe, he went back to his orchids. The phalaenopsis were blooming with indecent pride. You'd think they'd solved the case. He didn't mention the mirror again, but I caught him once, 2 days after it ended, polishing the brass frame of the one in our front hall. He didn't notice I saw. He was humming, a fragment of something French and old. Maybe he was just thinking about orchids. Or maybe even Wolfe, every once in a while, wonders what it's like to see something in the glass that wasn't there before. And me, I watch myself in the mirror every morning, just long enough to confirm that I'm still here, still whole, still able to walk into places most people run from. Because in this business, mirrors don't lie, but they don't forgive either. Section 17 optional. A letter or visit after a week after the case closed. A small envelope arrived. No return address. Inside, a photo. Kenneth Greer, taken from a high angle, inside the elevator. Smiling. On the back, one line written in pencil. Everyone sees something. Wolfe burned it in the fireplace without a word. I kept the ashes. Just in. Case filed under Greer. Kenneth death by deceased. Case closed. Mirror retired. And the next time someone tells me they saw a dead man's reflection, I'll believe them. Just not for the reason they want.